So I'm back in the driver's side of the car now for a while, and I'm looking here at the fuse box, and this big mess of wires will all fit back up under the dash here, believe it or not. That's all. This is the Mark II loom, we'll say, that I have in my car for reliability reasons from years back. One thing I learned recently was that you need the clutch switch, which is this blue guy here from the Mark IV, or you need a switch of some description, and you also need the brake switch. And while I haven't got the car running right yet, the idea of these guys is that these both guys feed back into the ECU, and I really only picked up that from the wiring diagram. And what they do is that when you're going through the gears and changing the gears, when you press the clutch, you're telling the ECU, I've pressed the clutch. So the drive-by-wire accelerator pedal and the combination of that and the fact that you've got the clutch pressed kills the RPMs in the engine. From my reading on the net, if you don't have this switch in, what will happen is every time you press the clutch, the engine will start to like over rev a little bit. Like, so I'm guessing that would be like if you were doing 2,500 RPM and you were going from third to fourth gear. When you would go to fourth gear, you would typically have the revs maybe drop back to 2,000 perhaps, but as you engage the clutch again. But I believe without that, what will happen here is the revs will rise up a little bit because of the overrun of the engine. The engine is expecting acceleration, I suppose, and you miss out on that. And the brake switch actually feeds back into the ECU as well. So I've made myself two little brackets here that hold them just like the Mark IV type style. So these guys push in and turn. You have to have the pedal in place for these guys to turn. So when you're taking them out, these guys just simply click out like this, turn and pull. There's a little feature in them there. Get the camera to focus here. There's a little feature on the switch there, and that prevents you turning it unless this button is pushed, unless the actual actuator is pushed back in. So this guy's got to be back in before you can turn this guy around. Now, if you try and check the switch in this state, as in unfitted, it will actually read wrong. You got to put this guy in and click him. So he fits back in there with the pedal in place, and when you put him in, he basically just turns and clicks back into place. So now you have a working pedal again. So what I've done there, I suppose, just for, let's see now, what I've done here is, here's my pedal. I put on a little piece of plate here and bent it at 90 degrees, and I have a little slot. I get the camera to focus. A little bit of plate here. I've just bent it at 90 degrees, and I put a little slot here and drilled a hole in the pedal. Just put a screw, so now when I actuate my pedal, this little guy pushes back. I have it pushing back pretty much all the way, although I have a little intentional gap here so that the switch isn't being bottomed out. And from just messing with the pedal here, you got to have the pedal pushed by about that much before the switch starts coming on. So you would be okay if, for instance, if you were driving around and you were letting your leg on the clutch a little bit and maybe giving it a wee little push like that. It wouldn't do any harm from what I can see from the wiring. But anyway, so for just out of interest, the plugs that these guys fit. So this is the black, I think it's a 10-pin plug. So this is single wire coming off it here. This is white yellow, and the other one here is black red. Let me get a better focus here. So this one needs power going to it. So that would be power once you have the keys in. This guy here comes directly from the switch. So if we follow the wires back up along here, there's this wire here and going straight back up into the switch. There's 4 wires in the switch. This blue-black has to be powered up as well on ignition, plus 12. So what I do is I go through the wiring diagram and I find these guys and I start labeling them up. So I write down the thing, what voltage there are, ground or going to what pin they're going to, and I also put in, I like to write as well what ampage fuse they should be running to. So if I get that to fit there, so you can see I've got 15 written there and plus 12 on this side, so I have that means ignition. So the other, there's 4 pins, yellow black ECU. Shit. There's 4 pins in this plug. Pin 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Pins 1 and 4 are same color, so they're kind of a bit difficult to distinguish from one another. But if you root yourself out some VW wiring diagrams, you'll see this is the switch here. So you'll see pin 1 is fed by a 10 amp fuse, and it goes to pin 4, which goes onto this current track here. Now from here it goes to the brake light switch, or the brake lights themselves, I suppose, sorry, the brake light switch, and that's on that current track, and it also feeds back into the ECU here on pin 58 there, I think, is it? Yeah, 58 on the 121 pin connector for the ECU. So these diagrams are worth the weight in gold, and here we have then that's the yellow white wire coming there, and that's onto the other side of the switch. So that's the 4 pins, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this in turn then is the SW means black, so that's the black blue wire. So this guy goes into track A120 or A20, sorry, and that is fed by 12 volts, I believe, on ignition. I must double check that. So the brake lights themselves are powered from here. So when you press this switch, you'll notice it's normally open, and this switch is kind of normally closed, so they're in opposite. So it's important to get the wiring right in these, and if you were substituting maybe a switch from some other car, or maybe using old ones or the like, you could see how you could very easily make a mistake here by having 2 normally open switches, and this has a little, it can cause problems with the ECU. The ECU likes to know when you've got the brakes pressed, that may be just for traction control, but it also likes to know when you've got the clutch pressed for the overrun. So I hope this helps somebody. Just as a quick note, when I'm joining the wires, I like to use these little guys. These are cable joiners. And you use them in conjunction with a tool like this. What they do for you is they make connections like this. So I can see if I can get this guy to zoom in. So they make connections like this. So these are crimped connections. If I can get a focus here. So these guys. So these make proper crimped in connections. That doesn't look too hectic there, but what I'm doing there, of course, I'm joining the wires in like this. I put a heat shrink over that there, just deep-end this guy here, put a bit of heat shrink over that and heat shrink that down, because on this black plug here, this is for the brake pedal. This guy is supply to the ECU when you press the brakes, but it also supplies the actual brake lights, and the wire itself then goes back up into the plug. The brake light switch plug itself. So the one wire that's hanging out here, this guy here, so you can see this is basically a Y junction. You can see the wires there. So that's how that works. A few people have asked me about the drive-by-wire accelerator pedal, and was it going to swap the throttle body and all that kind of stuff. But really, I believe there's absolutely no need to whatsoever. I suppose the most difficult part about it is making up a bracket and welding it into the car, or bolting it into the car, or something like that. And on the other video, I showed a piece of flat plate, basically with some holes in it to match up with the holes in the pedal, bent and put into place. So inside here, get my phone to, I think so. This is my piece of metal here, and that guy's just welded onto the bulkhead there. And it turns out, flat as it is, it works perfect. So for wiring this guy up, this is probably the easiest, one of the easier bits of wiring that you'll do in the car. This is the harness out of the Mark IV. So we've got a plug at each end. I've just wrapped up the cable there in some cable wrap. And you got the blue plug at this end. And on the blue plug, this is the one coming from the ECU over here. So these guys snap together. This guy plugs into the top of the accelerator pedal, and that's it done. So that is all the wiring that is to the throttle pedal. Simple as. I suppose the addition that I mentioned maybe earlier is you do need the clutch sensor, and I believe you need the brake sensor, although that may be just to do with traction control or ABS stuff. But now when I put the 3 screws into this and mount this guy up, this guy is wired in. It's done. I don't see why you'd go to the bother of changing over to a drive-by cable type scenario and messing with the ECU and all that, unless you were going aftermarket on the ECU anyway. Then it might be a little bit easier. So that's my bit. I've been plugging away at the wiring now for a good few days, kind of getting bits and pieces done here and there. And I suppose what I've been trying to do is pick something to complete each day. come home from work and all that kind of stuff, and then do something with the car. Like put the clutch switch in, put the brake switch in, put the accelerator pedal in. So what I've done today is I've connected up the two lambda sensors, the pre and post sensors here. So what I've done is I've kept the factory loom intact. It's a little bit too long, but I'll see if I can get some pins to repin the ECU. I don't really want to join up the lambda sensor or the twisted pairs with connectors and stuff. I'd like to keep them, we'll say, intact, like Volkswagen have them in the car. So if I can get the pins for the ECU, I'll de-pin and re-crimp and put the pins back into the ECU again. If not, I'll just leave the bit of a spaghetti because it's kind of easy enough to tuck it away anyway. So what I've done is I've drilled a hole in the car here and put a grommet out, and this is the factory lambda sensor loom there. So I just popped the hole there, 40mm hole. This is a grommet I had off another car, I think it's off a Toyota or something. I haven't found anywhere actually to buy nice grommets for running through the bulkheads or anything, but typically just reusing ones that get from other cars, from salvage, I suppose. So that's those wires going off the lambda sensor there. Now let's pop out now into the engine bay to show what I've done with the two plugs. So out the engine bay now, and what I have here, this is the grommet I have coming out through the car. So you can see it's just coming out of there. I put it on the flat there, the boss, where I guess the steering column would come out on a left-hand drive car. So this guy fits in, this is off a door, so yeah, it fits in nice and tight. And I have a bit of tape put here, a bit of conduit left on it. This was from the factory. And what I did then was I made myself up, I don't know if you can see it here, a little simple enough bracket there with some slots cut in it. So these guys kind of push into the slots, if you follow me. So I can pull them out like this and show you what the bracket looks like a little bit there maybe. So something simple enough. And I reuse the whole, spent a piece of metal, and reuse the bolt that I already had in the car holding the strap on. So this guy then, just like in the factory, just slips back in there, nice and tight, give it a push, and they're back in there, back in home. So that's the two lambda sensors connected up. So another piece of the wiring done. So tomorrow we'll tackle something else. Another day, another wire ran. So this time I'm doing is concentrating here on powering up the ECU. There's a relay for that, and the relay number is 428. And I'm just going to show where that is in the wiring diagram and where the pin numbers are. This plug here, if anyone has a Mark IV GTI or similar car, you'll notice this would typically live in the engine bay. So this would have been plugged outside in the engine bay. And the reason as well for that probably is this relay would also have lived in the engine bay. So I'm going to have that inside in the car now. And I've taken this wire, I've lengthened it because it's not long enough to come in from the engine bay, I suppose. So I've used a gauge of a wire that is slightly heavier. Unfortunately the colours don't match up, so on the wiring diagram, on the Volkswagen wiring diagram, if I can get the camera to focus here, it's black and purple. So it's a black and purple wire here, that's just this guy here. I get a proper focus in it there, but trust me, it's black and purple. But the wire I had that I used is just a different colour. So I like to do it stuff like that is, as you can see here, I might print myself off a little label. I have a label printer, I suppose, and obviously I have. What I like to do here is I print myself off a little label and I put it on the wire, just in case I'm ever fault finding the wire afterwards and I come across this guy and say, what the hell is this for? Or maybe someone else might maybe. And at least with this on it, people might say, okay, this is connected to a black and purple wire. But this just keeps my engine bay a little bit cleaner, I suppose, by bringing this wire in. I don't have the extra plug hanging around outside it. And this is the plug itself we're talking about. So in the Volkswagen wiring diagrams, it calls this a T2 plug. And it gives the wire gauge size, the wire size that's inside them in the diagrams. And there's only one wire in it, but of course it is meant for two. You can see there could be another wire here. If you had the pins, nothing stopping you taking this rubber grommet out and put another wire in there and using it for two wires. Same on this side. It's just grommeted up. So this piece of the loom here, this white and red wire, this is part of the Volkswagen original loom. And this if you follow the wires back along, it all follows back to this relay. So you can take this out of the loom intact. And you notice on the loom here that this red and grey wire is actually jumped out from the black and red wire. So you can see there, they're in the one connection. When I take these things apart or de-pin them, take them out, I just like to write on them the numbers of the wires or the colours or something like that. Take a photograph or something. Anyway, so you've got a little small purple wire here, which goes back to the ECU. And this one here is power. And these two beside each other here power this relay up to energize from one side of the heavy gauge wire, that's the white and red, to the other white and red. And that of course goes back to the socket here in one side, and the other part of it follows back up into the loom of the car. So it goes off into the ECU there, into the spaghetti. And where that is in the wiring diagram is, if we can see here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, so hopefully we can get a bit of focus on it. So this is the relay here, this is the 428, this is that relay, and here is the wire that's jumped inside in the connection. So you can see the red green there. It comes from pin 1, which is common. The 30 means here is, this is like a standard style of relay where you have like 85, 86, 30 and 87. So this is a standard style of relay. So that's all the 30 means there. So you can see that this white red WS is white. So this white red wire here goes up into this power track C here. And while this maybe for someone that's not used to the wiring might seem a little daunting, if you follow that along here, they give it various numbers of current tracks and stuff. You'll notice that it goes down to a 1.5 here, and this is RO. So if we go back over to our wiring diagram here, see RO is red. So we're back over here, RO, and this is like probably for an automatic car or something like that. And it goes down here to a 15 amp fuse, and it continues on then there. So this guy, I have to figure out yet, is this live all of the time, or only live when the ignition is on? But I'll figure that out and I'll get back to that. So for the moment, I know I need 15 amps coming through a red wire here, or red-green here is where it's connected up. And you'll see it's part of a plugged socket here. So it's figuring out where those guys are. So if you follow the wiring diagram and you look back at the ECU, and maybe not to confuse people too much, the T64, so that means it's a 6-pin connector, and it's pin 4 is where you're looking for this. And I suppose what's not obvious there is that's actually what they're talking about here. So pin 4 is this red and green wire. So if we go back down to our wiring diagram here, you see we've got red green, RO is red, red green, and that's that guy here. So this is part of the plug that actually comes on the ECU loom coming out of the car through the bulkhead. So there's some other wires here as well, but for now the red one. And that, if I follow that red wire out, it comes out, and here we have it here. Now this was going off into the loom in the car, so I've chopped this guy off the loom. I've left a lot of lint on it here. I don't know if you can notice that, maybe see that, but I've left a lot of lint on it there. What I do then is, like I mentioned earlier maybe, is I look these guys up, and you can see I already found out this guy here is, I've written on it here permanent, and I've also got the fuse size written on it there. Well, permanent and plus 12. I thought I had the fuse size on, but anyway, so the fuse is of course 15 amps. So this wire here then is connected to constant power through a 15 amp fuse, so that when you switch your relay on, the ECU closes this relay via the purple wire. That's LI there, that's the purple wire, and it uses the power over the jump here. So that's these guys here. So that small purple wire, the ECU triggers that, it grounds it, and you switch on the keys, and it puts power in through this circuit, which is the circuit here, which is the circuit E. So, and if you follow the pages on the wiring diagram then, flip over the pages and you can follow your E. You notice this guy goes over here and it goes into N70, N127, N291. I don't know why they don't keep these in sequence, but basically these are the ignition coils. So you can see that this wire is also going back to one of the ECU there. So it's like a signal back in. There's like a branch. You can see you have power coming here, power going there, power going to this one. But you also have one back here. But this is done internal in the wiring room. You don't have to do this yourself. And to find out which one of these are N70, if you have the wiring diagrams, if you go here, you see N70, ignition coil at the output stage. I mentioned earlier about the relay here. If I flick back to the previous page, just J271, which is this relay here. If you go to the pinout guide, you see here J271, Motronic current supply relay in protective housing and left of engine compartments, control number 428. Well, 428 that's what that is. So that probably makes it a bit easier to follow that if of interest. So I'm continuing on in the wiring, and what I have here on the screen is this guy here is the fuel pump relay. It's got many connections off it, and if you follow the diagram, a lot of these guys lead back to the crash protection system, where I imagine that system will automatically turn that relay off for you. So I'm not using that relay. I think it's probably a bit over complex for the simple system I'm going to use. I'm just going to use a regular relay, and I'm going to use something like this guy here. These little guys have fuses built in. I won't use a 30 amp fuse, so let's check what size the fuel pump is. But these are just your standard 4-pin relay. So it's one of these I'm going to use for that. And you can buy these sockets pre-wired with some tails off them. So I'm going to use this guy as well for plugging it in. And just in case you ever have to change anything, it means you don't have to be worried about putting the wrong pins back on the wrong places. Once you wire up right once and you plug it in and plug it out, it'll only plug into one direction. As you can see, 3 of the pins kind of they're parallel with the sides, but one of the pins is perpendicular, so it only fits in one direction. Handy thing to know. On the fuel pump relay here, you notice this wire here from the ECU is the one that is triggering it. So that's in the loom, and that's in the 6-pin connector, and it's pin 2. So that guy there triggers the relay. So I'm going to do something similar here, only this wire here will be going to ground. So that's what I'll be working at, or the current is flowing back. Let's check that out. Because most of the time the ECU is grounding the relays. So I'll check which way that works. And this is the fuel pump relay itself, and this, if you follow current track A here, it goes into the relay and comes out then on current track I. So if I skip over to the next page, or if you notice as well here, you've got these boxes here with little numbers in them. And just in case you're not sure of what these guys are for, these guys actually tell you the track number, or the section number of where these guys go. So for example, this number 12 here, if you look at the bottom of the wiring diagrams, you'll see there's numbers along here. So if you flick the pages around and get as far as number 12, bear with me a second. If you flick around and you go and you find number 12 and you look up here, you will find that is where this wire is coming from. So if you go back to 173, like the little box says there. So here we are, the numbers along the bottom here. So 173, look up along, and here we are, back at number 12. So that's that wire. Now that wire has no significance, so I'm going to do. So what I'm concentrating here is current track I, and that then continues on underneath. And I just wrote in here plus 12 from the fuel pump. So it's feeding into this track here, into a 15 amp fuse. It continues on then down to the fuel pump. And this guy here is ground, so all connects back to ground. The bottom track here is ground. So what I got to notice here as well is this guy is joined along here, and I've also got these wires. These are strong wires, but they also go into fuses. And if you follow these guys then as well, you will notice that they also go to different tracks. So you've got to check out where these guys go to. You see this guy here is also feeding in here to current track I. So when the fuel pump connects back in, it also, here's the current track I in the bottom of the previous page, and you'll notice here it goes to this G70, which is the air mass meter. So if you wanted to check that your fuel pump was powered up and you didn't have the fuel pump connected, if you were to check at this pin here too, you should have 12 volts with the ignition. Just something more checking. So to mount all that stuff then, what I did was I had a good look in around the car, and things are starting to mount up a little bit in the passenger footwell. So I cut out this piece of cardboard here and I shaped it in around where on the left hand side of the car, down by where the passenger's feet would be. So I've cut this guy in and kind of bent it and made little tabs and stuff. So I've done that and I've taped the piece on. I cut it too short first, just add a piece on. This guy's another little tab here. It's missing its leg. But I transferred that then onto a piece of stainless that I had. And this guy basically fits up on top of that. So I started cutting out around then and cut in, bent my tabs, drilled some holes. Just kind of chamfered them off and stuff. And the same thing down at the bottom here. And these guys are for bolting onto the car. And what I'm doing here, of course, is I'm creating a gap between the back of this and here. Well, it's not terribly important. What it is just really handy for is you want to run something up the back of it. For example, the bonnet pull cable goes up the back of this guy here. So I started looking then at what I need to mount up in this fella here, and started, planning it out, I suppose, what I'm going to mount in this fella. So in planning out here, the one thing that has to happen is when the ignition is switched on, certain tracks have to become live. So this relay was in the car already in the Mark IV Golf, so I'm going to use that. It's able to switch on a substantial load. It's got nice strong pins on it and some hefty enough cable coming out of it. I have one cable currently removed. So what I'm doing here then is I'm looking at a way of kind of mounting that on here onto the car. So these little square features here, one either side here, what I've done is I've bent myself up a little clip here, and these guys basically hook in there, and I can push that guy then down there and push him home. So I'm going to use this guy. I'm going to power up my board through this guy from my ignition keys. So one will be positive, one will be ground. This guy will switch, and it will switch the power then to some of these fuses here, and that will sort that bit out. I am going to mount my fuel pump relay up over here through the little clip that's on it. That's what the little screw is for. So I'll put that on once I have it mounted into the car, so I have access to this screw here. That would be the second relay there. These then are for some of the tracks that have to become live, like we'll say ones for powering up the sensors, the actual injectors and things like that. So I put the relative fuse into this guy here. And the other bit I'm going to use then off the Mark IV is this guy here. So this is the power distribution box. So this is a really neat piece of kit. It's got a plug on the bottom of it. It's got a couple of terminals in there. So that this guy gets powered through this cable here, or I have to change that cable, I suppose, a bit on the short side. It should have been out the engine bay, I think, if I remember right. And so if you open this little box up here, then you've got some nice fuses in here, which are really handy for the alternator, starter motor, and he's got 3 fuses over here as well, which is really handy as well.